Okay, you don't have to say anything, but it may harm your defence if you do not mention, when questioned, something today's trial in court. Anything you do say may be given as evidence. What road are we on? Birmingham Road. 426, priority. Birmingham Road, I think we've got the offender.
It's not murder.
Yes, we've got a male here, he's presented himself to us. Can we just get another unit now?
When police went to question Nicholas Prosper, because there was just something about the way he was acting in the moment that you'll have seen in that video, it makes sense that they had absolutely no idea whatsoever what they were about to uncover. No matter what the police were thinking in those moments and minutes where they were talking to him, nothing could have prepared them to actually realise the evil that had played out on September the 13th, 2024. It's terrifying to think that this young man was on his way to carry out the most unspeakable crimes after he had already carried out what can only be described as family annihilation of the highest level. This case is one that will blow your minds, and also I think you're going to find it difficult at the end to feel that justice really was done. But stay with me for this video and you can let me know in the comments. I always appreciate reading your thoughts on these matters. For those of you who are new to my channel, I release my content here. It's always crime orientated. I do it twice weekly, ad infinitum. It will always be the way. Also, I release full-length episodes on my YouTube membership and Patreon. So if you like what you see here, you can always get more there. Also, if you are enjoying my content, please subscribe, get your notifications on. You will never miss an episode. And also please give me a like because it really, really helps my channel grow. And I want to get out to as many people as possible. Now, like I said, this case is one that's probably going to leave you a little bit frustrated, and I'll explain that further in the actual video itself. But it's just chilling to the bone to imagine that this young man, and he is a young man, had the capacity to carry out something so reprehensible that it is mind-blowing. And also, if he had been able to succeed in the actual crime that he planned, well, we would be talking about a lot more people losing their lives. And in this case, we're talking about children losing their lives. Let's talk about our perpetrator in this case, Nicholas Prosper. He was born on the 18th of December 2005. My youngest son was born in 2005. He's a baby as far as I'm concerned. It blows my mind that somebody born in December 2005. So let's be real. This is a kid who's in his 20th year, about to embark on his 20th year of life, can actually hoard the level of resentment, the level of desire, the level of malevolence within his nature that's going to lead him to carry out the crimes I'm going to describe today. Nicholas Prosper's parents were called Juliana Prosper and Ray Prosper. They actually had 4 children together, and they did actually end up getting divorced, but it wasn't a horrendous separation. It wasn't a separation that seems to have clouded his existence in any way. Now, after the separation, Juliana lived at a flat in Lee Bank in Marsh Farm, Luton. She lived there with 3 of her children. So that was Nicholas and his younger siblings, Kyle and Giselle. Now, there was also an older son, a brother. Now, I can't find his name, but he did live at a different address. And I'm going to assume that they were still in contact with the family, essentially, but I don't have a lot of information on him. Now, Prosper, growing up, was super interested in computers. That is something we would expect for lots of boys in this day and age. I mean, I think gaming is a massive part of young people's lives. Social media is a massive part of a lot of children's lives. So it isn't unusual to be interested in computers. Also, he's considered to be quite geeky, quite quiet. They're really positive traits on the whole, aren't they? You know, quiet people are quite introspective. They're quite sensitive. They tend to be quite compassionate and kind. And when you're geeky, let's be clear, it means you're clever. It's as simple as that. People who are geeky and interested in a range of things that others are not is because they just have this keen interest in the world around them, and specifically to the interests that they pick to really be engaged in. So they're not negative traits in any way, shape or form. And one of the things that does stand out about him that maybe is, I suppose, atypical, he didn't want people invading his personal space. Now, I get it. we all have different parameters where we allow certain people a certain range of opportunity around us physically, and we also have levels where we feel we are being intruded upon if people breach those boundaries. But for the most part, we don't really mind people that we like being in our proximity. It tends to be how bonds are formed, how intimacy is built, and how relationships are sustained, but he had a problem with it. And certainly when you listen to him in certain videos, I don't think you need a qualification in psychology or psychiatry to go to yourself. There just seems to be a little something off about this young man's character. Now we get to September 2022. This is at a point where Prosper's left school and he's started sixth form. He really doesn't like it. And apparently he was really angry with his mother because she was making him attend. She had actually observed in the months that he'd been attending that he'd become less and less interested in social interaction. She'd noticed that he wasn't really making friends, and also he was apparently becoming quite overwhelmed in those situations. So he started to become withdrawn at home as well as at school. Now, on reflection, hindsight is always, you know, an amazing tool, isn't it? Because you can look back at what you would have done if you'd had all the information. But I totally get it. I get the fact that his mother probably sees that he has potential. She's concerned that he's throwing that potential away by not attending college. So she's just reinforcing it's something that he has to do. Equally, I can stand in the shoes of a young person and think to myself, when a young person is unhappy in a situation, it's really important to listen to their needs, acknowledge that they maybe have different beliefs and choices than you would make for them, and enable them to feel that sense of autonomy about their choices. Personally, I think if a child's really unhappy at college, maybe it's not the place for them. Certainly, my youngest son was removed from college within the first few terms because they just weren't very nice to him, not the kids, but the teachers. And actually they weren't inspirational and they didn't make him feel good. And I don't want my child to be in that situation, but every parent is different. I just personally believe that if a child is struggling and maybe they're struggling to deal with finding new relationships with peers or struggling with the subjects they're getting involved in, or maybe just feeling like a lack of interest in the environment, it's sometimes better to accept that it's not the right time for them in that moment. Now, that does not in any way, shape or form suggest that there is any incremental variables going on here that lead him to the crime we're going to talk about today. It is totally inexcusable on every single level. But what I'm trying to do is just stand in the shoes of somebody who's got some atypical behavioural traits, some atypical emotional social traits, and also this feeling of being helpless because they're not going to be given the choices that they want to make in their environment. And that can, in their head, with all those contributing factors, mean that they think about extreme ways of dealing with it. Now, in his classes, he was described as uncooperative. He was also described as somebody who was really resistant to assessment and intervention. He was a contrarian at best, objectionable at worst with respect, and a teacher would later refer to him as being a very socially awkward guy. And it's clear he is socially awkward. You can see in his videos, communication style wise, it would be challenging at times to engage with somebody who sees the world and acts within the world as he does. Equally, we will learn later on that he is on the autistic spectrum and he can effectively mask if he wants to. Now, masking, when we talk about autism, and some of you will be autistic listening to this, masking is what people will do to make the world apply more beneficially towards them. It's exhausting for people with autism because really what needs to happen is that autistic individual realises they're perfectly all right being the neurodiverse individual that they are. But for a long time, because of anxiety, because you want to fit in, often you will just try to act how you think you're meant to act. So he absolutely is an individual with the capacity to appear to the world as if he is a relatively typical individual, but it feels like in these later years, as he's growing through his teenagehood, he's becoming more resistant to that, which is making it more obvious to others that there may be issues that are going on. And I guess we could say it reaches a crescendo in March 2023. This is when he actually gets asked by the school to leave. So he is becoming increasingly isolated, but much of this is by his choice. So he isn't somebody who has to leave. He could have worked harder. He could have been in a situation where he'd reached his potential, but instead he's chosen not to. And the consequence of that is the school obviously obviously can't be bothered working with him anymore when he isn't doing the work that he needs to do to achieve. But this means, of course, that he's by himself more. Now, bear in mind, this means he's unemployed, he's no longer in school. That means his life is going to revolve around going to the gym and lots of hours alone on his computer. Again, not atypical where young people are concerned. In fact, the very fact that he goes to the gym, that's an incredibly positive reality. I mean, we'd all be encouraging our children to do that. I'd be encouraging me to do that because my brain hasn't got the memo right now about going to the gym. And I do think that at some point I will merge with this chair. But for the most part, what he's doing is in context with being a young person. There are a lot of kids who don't know what they want, don't know where they're going, concerned about their futures, don't necessarily make the moves at that moment in time, age-wise, to engage in very constructive tasks that are going to lead them to a better place. Sometimes it can take a very long time for them to activate those motivators. But the fact that he's going to the gym, the fact that he is on his gaming equipment, well, it's not something that's going to raise too many alarm bells because it, like I said, is in context with what many young people go through. Now, his parents did believe at this point that he may have autism, hadn't been diagnosed at this point, but he was then referred to the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Services team to get that looked at. But Prosper just refused to engage with the GP. And so at that point, literally nothing ended up coming from that referral. So like I said, his parents are trying their best, but it's very challenging when you're dealing with an elder teenager because if they say no, what can you do? And as somebody who specialised with young people for 15 years of my life, I can let you know that it didn't matter how many people were referred to my service from the college that I used to run a mental health service within. If that young person did not want to come, then they didn't come. They didn't turn up for that first appointment because they have their own volition, they have their own autonomy, and you have to respect that. So even though the parents are trying, they're not necessarily getting very far with him. And also bear in mind, Prosper would need to see that there was something problematic experience-wise for him in the world that required some attention for him to actually want to go and see anybody anyway. You know, the idea that people who are neurodiverse actually think there's something wrong with them isn't necessarily true for many. Many people are perfectly okay with the fact that they're quite quirky or a little bit eccentric and they've accepted themselves fully. They don't feel the need to go and be assessed because they feel quite functional in the world and it works for them. I think for Prosper, he did know that there was something ultimately within his psyche that wasn't right, but I don't think that he felt that that was his problem. I believe that Prosper felt entitled to the actions we're going to talk about today because his mindset was so antisocial, so unconcerned about strong intimate connections and bonds that he can act according to his own worldview, not to the worldview that's provided for him by people like you and I in the society that we live in. Now we get to September the 13th, 2024. At this point in Luton, at around 5:50 a.m, armed police suddenly arrive at a Lee Bank flat on the 8th floor where Juliana and her children live. Now you can imagine the furore in the local area. This is terrifying. At the end of the day, armed police are a big deal and you know that something is really serious kicked off if this happens. Now it turns out the reason that they've ended up there is a neighbour had actually phoned the emergency services 20 minutes earlier. They'd heard lots of noise, they'd heard lots of commotion coming from the residents, and when they went upstairs to complain, what they said they heard was this boy groaning, and then they heard a gunshot. So unsurprisingly, that neighbour rightfully reevaluated their plan to knock on and complain about the noise because they realised something super serious has played out and actually something that sounds like it could be fatal. And you know what? They were 100% correct. When the police arrive, I promise you, it doesn't matter how dyed in the wool you are as an officer. It doesn't matter how many horror scenes that you have turned up to witness. I don't think anything would have prepared them for the horror they were about to be confronted with, because it is horrific. So after forcing their way in, they discover the dead bodies of Juliana, the mother in this case, 16-year-old Kyle, and 13-year-old Giselle. And the flat is literally soaked in blood. There's blood splatter, there's handprints in the blood, aspirated, airborne, spattered blood. So obviously as they were breathing in and out, this is causing that airborne aspiration. A number of bloody knives were found. One was actually bent out of shape, and every one of the victims had been shot. But Kyle, poor Kyle, he'd also suffered really serious, numerous stab wounds. And one of the eerie details that occurred in that scene was that there was a book titled How to Kill Your Family. It's a book by Bella McKee, and with respect, it's a very successful book. It's quite humorous, but just contextualize it in the scene that we're talking about right now. There's a dead family, and somebody has literally positioned the book How to Kill Your Family on Juliana's legs. So the killer has purposefully and willfully done that. And that's a sign, isn't it, to those people who've come in? That's staging. Now that speaks of rationality. It speaks of a choice that's made, not in a moment of madness. So whoever's carried out this horrific attack, they've done it not only wanting to actually execute these individuals, but wanting to leave a message that demonstrates that they had fully intentionally and willingly done exactly that. Now at 7:55 a.m. in the morning, a patrol car's driving back to the police station, and at this point they notice what they believe is a really suspicious individual on Birmingham Road. And it turns out that the two officers who were actually passing in that vehicle, they'd worked the night shift, they'd actually just left from standing guard at the cordon of the crime scene where Juliana, Kyle and Giselle had been murdered. So understandably, this is absolutely on their mind. Now the individual that they see, he's dressed in this really bright black and yellow tracksuit, and that means that he just really does stand out. He's at the side of the road and you can't help but notice him. He's also signalling to the police, he's raising his arms with his hand up. So obviously they're really intrigued about what this guy wants and what he's doing. And I almost feel like he looked a little bit like the Ali G character that used to be very popular in the UK, probably around the world. Sacha Baron Cohen played him. He's like this caricature of an individual. But there is something about the way that he looks that really reminds me of him. But it's very striking the way he's signaling. It's very striking the way that he looks. They pull over and pretty immediately they realise he's got a knife in his pocket. Also, he's got his hands covered in blood. So they know at this moment in time, whatever this person is doing, they've done something problematic because it's not his blood that he's got on his hands. So at this point, they actually arrest him. He repeatedly is saying to them, it's not murder. And then he asks them if they've seen the fake shotgun certificate that he made. Now, you'll understand in a minute why he asked that question, because there is a level of pride in this killer. There really is. This is somebody who wants notoriety more than he wants freedom. That's absolutely true to form in this case. Now, one of the officers at this point says, I think we've got the offender, and they are 100% right. They absolutely have their guy. And as you'll see in the footage of the arrest, it's very clear that this is an individual who isn't resisting. He just has information he wants to share with the officers. He then leads the police to a bush, and this is of course where he's hidden a gun, and he'd also hidden over 30 cartridges. It's very difficult in the UK to get a gun, guys. It's even more difficult to get bullets. So you will find that guns can be acquired on the dark web, but actually getting ammunition for them is incredibly challenging, and he's got both gun and bullets. Now at this point, he is taken into custody. He's charged with 3 counts of murder, possession of a knife blade in a public place, purchasing or acquiring a shotgun without a certificate, and possession of a shotgun with intent to endanger life. So these are really serious charges, of course. Now, when he's interviewed, one of the things that comes across very quickly is he's not willing really to divulge very much. He's actually saying no comment during an interview. I always find that really deeply disturbing and frustrating, because I always feel that on the whole, the person is indicating their guilt. And when you think about somebody who can contain themselves in such a manner when he's eradicated and executed the majority of his family, it talks about a callousness within nature that is quite unusual to behold. And thank God it's quite unusual to behold. Now, because of the reluctance at this point for him to actually talk to the police about exactly what's happened, they've got to piece what happened together as best that they can. Now, they believe his mother, Juliana, woke up around 4:50 a.m. That's earlier than expected. And at this point, she has the horrifying realization that Nicholas Prosper has a gun. She then disturbs him. She must have been incredibly shocked, incredibly unhappy that her son has actually got a gun, and that means that he is an individual who get himself into a lot of trouble. Because let's just be clear about this. If you are a mother, it doesn't matter who your child is, for the most part, you will believe in their best. Your bias will be this person would never do A, B, or C. Now, proven time and time again to be an incorrect bias, and unfortunately a deadly bias in certain circumstances. But I get it. She's going to see him with a gun and be like, Nicholas, what are you doing? She's going to be really upset with him because he's putting himself at danger and risk of actually finding himself in prison. She's not going to think to herself, oh, maybe he's going to kill me. But of course, that's what happens. A struggle ensues. She actually has defensive wounds on her arms and her hands, and ultimately, her own son, he shoots her at close range in the top of her head in the hallway. Now, you can imagine the sound of a gun of that magnitude going off in a small home. The noise is instantaneous, it's enormous, it's foreign. His sister Giselle, she wakes up, she puts her glasses on, she's trying to figure out what on earth is happening. At this point, Prosper shoots at her. The bullet isn't actually on target, it just grazes the back of her head. And this 13-year-old child, this little girl, she runs away in absolute terror and fear from the brother that she's never known had such potential. Like a child would. That little girl hides under the table in the lounge, and what does he do? He follows her. He then takes the gun. They believe literally holds it to her right eye and shoots her in the face. So that was a contact shot. It means that the gun was in direct contact with her when the bullet was fired. Cool, calm, execution. That's the only way it can be described. Now, this commotion is going on. His brother Kyle, who's 16, wakes up, obviously has no idea what's happening, but knows that he's in danger. So he runs to the kitchen. He grabs a knife. He's just hoping he can defend himself. But of course, that's not going to work out because a knife is absolutely no match for a gun. Prosper comes and shoots him immediately from a distance. Then he goes over after managing to shoot him, and he stabs him over 100 times. Over 100 times. Now that is, of course, a frenzied attack. I do feel that the fact that this brother chose to get a knife, that was something that Prosper really didn't like. He didn't like the fact that this child, this younger brother of his, was daring to try to fight back. He wasn't having any of it. How dare you? It's an insult to me. I've planned this killing. You are going to go along with this killing. You're going to go along with this fantasy as I've created it. You're not going to disturb that. How dare you think you can fight back? And so that's why he is punished in such a frenzied way. He had wounds to his face, his head, his neck, his torso, his limbs. One of his lungs is punctured. And the hardest thing that I have to tell you in this moment about Kyle is he was alive for every single one of those wounds. He was begging his older brother not to kill him. And when he was finally disarmed by his brother, he was still able to actually flee into the hallway. And what was he met with in the hallway? His mother's dead body. And of course, Prosper has absolutely no desire to let him go. Doesn't matter how he's begged and pleaded for his life. Doesn't matter how blooded, broken, terrified that child is. He's rewarded for daring to try to save himself, for daring to try to fight back by being shot in the back of his head at close range. That ultimately killed him. But not before, as I said, this brother of his, this elder sibling he should have been able to look up to, had all but destroyed his entire body. It's harrowing to imagine the absolute fear that all of that family experienced in their final moments. But for Kyle, his suffering was just so prolonged, so protracted in comparison to the others. Also, when it came down to the amount of bullets that had been fired, Prosper had shot 7 times in total. One of them had apparently been a test shot on a teddy bear. and the others, all but one bullet, had been inflicted on the family who had loved him, who had cared for him, who'd wanted the best for him. And that was the reward for their feelings. Now, as if what I've just described is not horrific enough, if that's not going to satisfy a murderer enough, no, it's not. Because it's discovered that he'd actually intended to cause far more bloodshed that day. The reason that he was at that bus stop was because only part one of his murderous plan had been instituted. Now, like I said, initially he said no comment during those interviews, so this comes out later. But he later confided in a mental health nurse about what the true intent had been on that day. So actually, he had planned to go to St. Joseph's Catholic Primary School, under 11s, guys. Now, that was the primary school that he and his siblings had attended. And so he had a reference to that, and he wanted to be there at 9 a.m. And the plan was this. He was going to go into the classroom with the youngest children. At this point, he was going to pretend to rob the teachers. So obviously the kids are going to be scared, intimidated, afraid, but they're not going to be worrying about their life. And even the teachers aren't going to be that prepared, because at the end of the day, this guy's armed, but he's saying that he wants to steal. He's not saying he wants to kill. And bear in mind, these children start school at 4 years of age to 5 years of age. So these children are literally the most vulnerable, the most ill-equipped to know what to do in such a situation, if anyone can prepare for this kind of situation. But the reality is, the younger you are, it's going to be even more challenging. You haven't got the wherewithal to understand wanting to escape. You just do what adults say because that's what you're being indoctrinated with at school, and you haven't got the conscious understanding that somebody could wish to do you the most horrendous harm. So literally, he's specifically gone for the youngest group of children. And he said after he'd convinced them that he wanted to rob them, he was then going to start shooting the 4-year-olds. He had a target of 34 victims. He wanted at least 30 of these to be children aged 4 or 5. If he had not apparently met that target also in one classroom, he was then going to go into another, and he was going to continue the massacre until he reached his desired number. Then he apparently said to the mental health nurse that he intended to take his own life after he'd achieved his goal. And he commented that the one regret that he had on the day that he executed the majority of his family is that he wished he had killed more. This man, because he is a man now, he displayed absolutely no remorse whatsoever. The only regret that he ever had was that he wasn't able to murder more people and that he didn't get to be as notorious as he wished to be. He'd also been literally just a mile away from St. Joseph's Primary School. That's when he's apprehended. So he was very much en route. Now, the heavy police presence in the area after that neighbour had called the authorities, that meant that he'd realised pretty quickly that it was likely his plans were not going to be successful. He felt that he wouldn't likely be able to get to the school for his chosen time of 9 a.m. without being discovered. So he essentially bit the bullet, shall we say, and flagged the car of the police down. Prosper also commented that he was originally going to commit the murders on September the 12th, but he decided that Friday the 13th had sounded better because, bear in mind, he's trying to create notoriety. He wants it to be as evil, as malevolent, as enormous a crime that people will never forget his name. He said that he had intended to shoot his family originally in their beds while they slept, but of course it didn't go to plan. Apparently, and really disturbingly and chillingly, he had initially also planned to rape his sister. Let that sink in. And this is not a young man who is just saying things to intimidate and terrify those he's speaking to. He certainly had the plan to go ahead and molest his sister because he had an absolutely clear interest in children who were being sexually molested, which we'll come to shortly. Now, the investigators found that his internet searches were disturbing beyond belief. He'd frequently read about mass shootings, so in particular he read about mass shootings carried out in schools. He showed an interest in notorious murderers and rapists. Now, I know that we're all very interested in this as well, but we're interested in it for a completely different reason. We know why we're interested in it, because we have this desire for justice. We hate that terrible things happen to people. We want to stand in the shoes of victims and their families and feel that empathy. That's not what this guy is doing. He was searching because it gave him a voyeuristic pleasure to know about these actual killings, and also it was informing him of what to do and how to do it. He also searched, do you die if shot in the neck? Now, the investigators believe that he'd searched that because he was intending to kill himself after the school shooting, and it turns out he actually got banned from a website because he confessed to watching a child sexual abuse video and also making comments of a pro-paedophilia nature. Now, I don't know why somebody didn't report that, because genuinely if somebody admits that they've been watching child sexual abuse videos and they're being pro-paedophile, that is somebody that needs dealing with by the authorities. I also appreciate it might not be that simple, particularly if somebody's got a VPN, for example, to stop them from making those comments. But the fact that he was banned suggests to me that there's been an IP address ban, and therefore there would be an opportunity to actually figure out who he is. And that could, to some degree, have prevented a further tragedy. Like I said, I'm not blaming the people who just said, you're not welcome here anymore. I'm just saying that it's really powerfully important when these kind of things happen that people act accordingly and go to the right authorities to discuss what they found out, because there is something darkly malevolent and evil in my mind about anybody who's talking about those issues or saying they've watched this kind of exploitative material. Now, it also turned out during those digital searches that he'd gathered photos of a 6-year-old girl who was a victim of the Sandy Hook massacre. He even attempted to get in contact with her mother. He was trying to use a false name to do that, but he obviously really likes to be intrusive around this kind of tragedy, you know, to garner and gather as much information for his own pleasure, as opposed for a purpose to actually care deeply about what had happened to those individuals. Also, on top of that horrific stuff, he also had over 200 indecent photos and videos of children. 19 of those videos involved the category A, the worst of the worst, rape of children. Now, again, in the UK, we are bonkers when it comes down to how we press charges against these kind of individuals. So let's cut out the fact that we know that we're also talking about somebody who is an absolute murderer of the highest level. When it comes down to this kind of material, people are watching it online, they're watching it on their phones, etc. What is mind-blowing is even when it's category A, like I've just suggested, when it is the worst of the worst type of material, it might involve children being raped, it might involve newborn babies being attacked in this way, it will often involve things like bestiality and bestiality with children. You would imagine that if anybody's watching that kind of horrific material, I don't know, we should just put them in a very small cage for eternity. Because at the end of the day, they're still breathing. You know, you can feed them through the bars, wood chippings and lava. But at the end of the day, they would be away from the children that they clearly pose a risk to. In the UK, you know what you get? You get a community sentence, you get a bit of a slap on the wrist, don't do that again. As if you haven't actually caused children to be abused. Because you didn't physically touch them with your fingers. You didn't physically groom that child with the psychological grooming that we would apply to when it's in a contact physical crime. But you know what you did do? You created a need for that filth. And so that should mean that you go down for a very long time. But like I said, weirdly in the UK these days, we seem to go very, very fairly on these absolute not rights. And you know how I feel about it, guys, and I don't care how unprofessional I come across. Feel free, if you're a professional, to write a slagging me off comment in the comments. I will just feel that that reflects on you, not me, because where children are concerned, they are our ward. We must protect them, and it is disgraceful in the UK that we do not actually take these crimes anywhere near as seriously as we need to. So it's also worth noting that that statement about wanting to rape his sister was clearly true, and based on the fact that he has a predilection for very young children. Also, leading up to the murder, there were really disconcerting and chilling searches. So between midnight and 4 a.m. on the morning of the murders, Prosper had actually researched a number of mass shootings, necrophilia, which is obviously a paraphilia where you are interested in having sex with dead bodies. And he was also searching the murder of Sarah Everard. I've covered the case of Sarah Everard. She was murdered by a police officer, a guy called Wayne Couzens. If you haven't seen that video, please do go and watch it. It is harrowing, And it's also a reminder that it really doesn't matter whether somebody's wearing a uniform. That doesn't mean they're protective in any way, shape or form. Actually, it can do the opposite. It can mean they have a power complex that means they are dangerous and more dangerous than the average human being walking the streets without a uniform. Also at 4:11 a.m, he watched extreme animated pornography. I think that should be illegal. Look, I get it. Each their own. Some people will say pornography is not harmful. I would absolutely disagree with that. I think that there will always be pornography in our society because sex is something that connects so many people in so many ways. But these days, every sadistic desire is literally exampled in pornography. I appreciate that you can't search inappropriate searches such as I'm looking for a child, because instantly you'd get a warning saying that that's not legal. But you can get around that, can't you, by watching extreme animated pornography where they're depicted in cartoons and within animation. Even the porn sites that are around, you can go on there and search terms that will still get you somebody who looks incredibly young and so on and so forth. And I find that really destabilizing for our society, and I think it gives a really bad message to children and young people growing up because they access it without a shadow of a doubt. The idea that you just got to say, yeah, I am over 18, and you get in there as if that's actually a marker of protection and security for those who shouldn't be seeing it is ludicrous. But this is our society now, isn't it? Where the Bonnie Blues of this world, no Lily Phillips of this world, the individuals who are so broken and fractured personality-wise that they can't see how used they are, and they think that money is the answer to success as opposed to having some humility and grace and purpose in a positive way. This is the world that we live in, and as we watch ourselves sliding into these murky waters, we see more and more of these individuals having access to information and material that they should never be allowed access to, which is why I think there should be some regulation on this kind of filth that's out there. Now at 4:42 a.m, he searched school massacres. That included the 1999 Columbine attack. I'm sure that the vast majority of you, if not all of you, know about the Columbine attack that happened April the 20th, 1999. It happened at Columbine High School in Columbine, Colorado, United States. The perpetrators were just 12th grade students, a guy called Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold. They together murdered 13 students and one teacher. 10 were killed in the school library. So an absolutely blot on the landscape of American education history. Now, after Prosper had murdered his family, he kind of, for a short period of time, went into hiding before he was going to attempt to go to that school. And then he actually posted a pre-recorded video on Facebook at 6:22 a.m. And it's so weird. He just looks dead behind the eyes, number one. And number two, for those of us who don't know gaming, it's hard to relate to because we're not aware of the characters that he actually has played with online. But there's just something about the way he's rehearsed it. It's almost like he's reading from a script. And at this point, he's basically speaking about the Walking Dead games.
On June 30th, my sister decided to make the only correct choices in episode 1 of season 1 of the Walking Dead games, and for that her face will be mutilated further than necessary. I also recall a video by Living Echoes on YouTube, Best of Lee and Clementine Definitive Edition. It was a compilation, and he decided to kill Larry in front of Clementine, and then I later learned he decided to kill the St. John's in front of Clementine. I am the chosen one, chosen by Clementine. I am guided, as Christians are guided by Jesus Christ. And there will be no more killings of Larrys in front of Clementine, no more killings of St. John's in front of Clementine. And overall, Clementine's content will be preserved, maximised. That's the message I want to give out.
And in this video, as you'll have seen, he says, I am the chosen one, chosen by Clementine. I am guided as Christians are guided by Jesus Christ. Now, Clementine, just for those of you like me who didn't know, she's a character in the game who Prosper had apparently become obsessed with. He also says that his sister's face will be mutilated further than necessary because of her incorrect choices on the game. And I guess that some people come from the outside looking in and say, well, maybe this shows a delusion. Maybe it shows a psychotic break where fantasy and reality have become blurred. No, it isn't. He isn't. I know it would sound like that, but there is absolutely no evidence whatsoever that there is any psychotic break whatsoever. And yes, to some degree, it's very real for him, the actual game, but that's because it is real for him. At the end of the day, what we spend our time doing, we become part of. So characters in books become part of who we are. You know, if anybody needs an example of why we know that's not psychosis and it's more to do with keen interest, just think about the Harry Potter franchise. I mean, I literally have friends who at 40, any opportunity to go to a fancy dress party, dressed fully as Hermione or Harry, you know, it's just one of those things that it kind of infected their nature. And these are completely rational adults, you know, give them tickets to Harry Potter World, they're going to leave you the house in the will. At the end of the day, we've become connected to characters, and that can be good and bad. But we don't need to be psychotic. We can be intellectual, academic, brilliantly humorous, fantastically kind and compassionate human beings who still are drawn in to these connections. That doesn't make us psychotic. It just makes us live in that world for periods of our life. And so too, he's living in that world with gaming for parts and periods of his life. Now, apparently, he'd actually been watching St. Joseph's Primary School, which is the school he used to go to with his siblings, and he was kind of figuring out what he would do at that school. He'd saved photos of the pupils, he'd saved photos of the staff from the school website, which again is just very haunting to know when you think about the prophetic reality of what he was intending to carry out. He didn't get to do it, but he was intending to do that. Now, 1 year prior to the murder, so just let that sink in, guys. We're not talking about this guy who's had some kind of psychotic break, who's lost sense of reality and ration, and has just suddenly gone completely insane in that moment. That's rare. It does happen. It absolutely does happen. I myself have worked with a young man who very sadly had a psychotic break, and he murdered his grandmother. Now, that's a terrible thing, but during that attack, he genuinely believed that she was going to kill him, and he saw her as an alien, not as a grandma. Now, that is a very rare kind of case, but it does occasionally happen. And he was out of his mind, and he didn't end up in prison. He ended up in a secure unit because he needed help with his mental health. Still meant that he was inside for a long time. But what I'm saying is, those moments are rare, and they don't involve a year of planning. But the thing is, this guy Prosper had been planning. So 1 year prior to the actual murders, this is on September the 13th, 2023, he'd actually called the school and he'd tried to find out the timetable for that school day. And then he'd used this cold calculation over a prolonged period of time to go about getting what he needed to fulfill the killings that he wanted to carry out. And for that, he's going to need a gun. And like I said, it's not easy in the UK to get a gun. But he'd been researching firearms. Also, he'd been very cleverly researching firearms certificates. This is as early as June 2024. So again, premeditation is enormous in this case. He'd also shown interest in shooting even earlier. So he'd booked time at a shooting range in August 2023. And he didn't actually turn up for that particular session, but he booked it. Then in April 2024, he becomes a member of Gun Trader UK, and he personally created a firearms certificate which was described as meticulously forged. So much so that it was actually believed to be real by not just one person but multiple people. It even featured the forged signature of a sergeant at the Bedfordshire Police Firearms Unit. Now, of course, he needs to create a story as to why he wants a gun. So he says that he wants it for clay pigeon shooting. And he was apparently able to discuss this in detail because he'd done his research, because it's so premeditated. So this means the murders are planned well in advance. And that means that when you get to court, there's going to be absolutely no argument against premeditation at all. Now, at the end of August 2024, he actually reaches out to someone who's selling a shotgun. Now, the seller just has that feeling that there is something off about this individual, that gut, that instinct, that intuition, it just speaks to them. And he refuses to sell Prosper the gun. Now, Prosper had gone about offering him £500 when this individual only wanted £150. So for that, he'd become really suspicious. However, it doesn't mean that he gives up. On August the 30th, he messages another seller. This person's selling the shotgun for £450. Prosper offers £600 if cartridges would also be included. He even offers to pay an extra £30 for petrol as a thanks to the seller for delivering it to him. Now, again, some people would find that offer over the odds as a little bit strange. The petrol money is a little bit strange, but equally, most of us just want to be able to get our cash and say goodbye. So on September the 12th, that's what happens. The day before he kills his family, Prosper meets with the seller and he successfully buys the gun from him. And as you'll see in the video, it's very clear that he isn't provoking any kind of attention that would make the individual who he buys it from be concerned. And the seller actually described Prosper as really polite, as well speaking, said he just seemed like a normal person, which is an absolute noticeable contrast to how he was perceived by others. But obviously he's very able, as I said earlier on, to mask, to put on that act to ensure that he obtains the weapon. And now he is armed and dangerous. And now he can put his evil plan into practice. Now, the police actually find a note that Prosper had written which claimed that this event would be one of the biggest events ever. It's so clear he wanted to gain infamy, notoriety. He wanted his name to be synonymous with this horrific attack. He wanted to massacre children and his family so that his name would go down in history. That was more important to him than anything. And on that note, he'd actually drawn a diagram of the early years classroom at St. Joseph's, and next to that, he'd written, "Kill all." He'd also drawn a second classroom with an arrow pointing to it. So this guy was fully intending to go ahead and kill all of those beautiful children, all those innocent, vulnerable beings who hadn't even begun their life. And why? Because he knew it would cause an international storm, and he would be at the centre of it. They also were able to find footage from April 2024. This is where he'd videoed himself. And at this point in the video, he's pretending to shoot with a piece of wood and he's whispering, "Bang." In this video, he actually wore a black and yellow outfit, a yellow bucket hat and shoes with yellow soles. And that was the outfit that he'd gone on to commit the murders in. Like I said, very Ali G in my mind. He'd apparently chosen as well that distinctive outfit because he wanted it to make him stand out more. So he didn't just want notoriety for the killings, he wanted notoriety for appearing so brash, so intent on being noticed and seen. The very opposite that most criminals want. Most criminals don't want to be noticed. Most criminals want to go under the radar. This wasn't about him getting away with murder. It was about his name being known for murder. So a very distinct reality from what the average criminal wishes when it comes down to their criminal activity. Now, in Prosper's arraignment, one of the things that I found really interesting is that his father, Ray Prosper, shouted, "I still love you, son. I know it's not your fault, okay?" I would politely disagree with his father, and I have deep empathy and sympathy for his father, but it was his fault. He wasn't in a psychotic break. He premeditated the killings. He was incredibly sophisticated in how he managed to acquire the gun. He planned on killing over 30 children. And you know it's not his fault. Whose fault is it? Is it your fault? I don't think so. Is it the mother's fault? I don't think so. Because it's possible that individuals are born onto this planet with a malevolence so deep within their DNA that it wouldn't matter what their life was like, what their experiences were, they were born to kill. And I believe that Prosper was born to kill. Now, with respect to a later date, during his victim impact statement, the father seemed to have changed his sentiments. He said that part of his soul had died when he heard about the murders. He said, "This is a lose-lose situation for us all, and we have lost 4 family members." Interesting, 4 family members. So his children, his ex-wife, and of course, Nicholas Prosper. But he hasn't lost Prosper, has he? Prosper's still alive. He's breathing. He can visit him. I understand the suggestion that he doesn't have access to his child, or he doesn't know the child that he once knew because he's changed, but he's lost 3, really. 3 human beings of infinite meaning to this world. He said the pain of our loss will never be healed. Our lives will never be the same. And Ray was also sobbing during the court appearances. He obviously found it incredibly distressing. And it speaks potentially of him, first of all, looking at the crime and believing there is no way this child that I brought into this earth has the capacity for such evil, so I'm going to believe that the reason he acted this way was because he had a moment of insanity. But you can imagine sitting through a court case and learning the true features of that court case and realising that that assumption was completely and wholly incorrect. Now, in February 2025, Dr. Ian Koyman, who's a forensic psychiatrist, he assessed Prosper and obviously wrote a report for court. And in that report, he said that the murderer exhibited traits of autism spectrum disorder, though not to a severe degree. And it had also been observed, and this is where I was saying earlier on, you might find this a bit frustrating, guys, that since he'd been arrested, he seemed to actually be functioning better. Apparently, according to this psychiatrist, being in prison hadn't caused suffering, as most people would suffer from incarceration. In fact, what this psychiatrist believed was because Prosper didn't really want any social relationships, he didn't need them, he enjoyed the routine. Prison life goes at a certain pace. If you're not concerned about loneliness, if it doesn't really bother you, if you don't have close connections, then you're fed, you've no responsibilities. You can get educated if you want to, take a job on if you want to, refuse to leave your bed if you want to. So for him, it really isn't a punishment. He actually expressed pride in his crimes. He liked the attention that it gave him. And when it came down to his autism, that was considered to have an indirect connection to his crime. So it was said that all the abnormal aspects of the way he related to people and obsessed about things, so he's interested in things such as school shootings, serial killers, they said that could be explained by his ASD. And they also said that the internet facilitated this through the free availability of imagery and commentary. But it was also noted that ASD does not correlate to an increased risk of violence. And that's really important. Why should people with autistic spectrum disorder suddenly get lumped in with, oh, by the way, you might want to become a mass shooter and murder your family because, you know, you have autism? Come on. That's not how it works. They also said that nor did ASD in this case impair his ability to understand the nature of his conduct. It didn't stop him exercising self-control or from forming rational judgments when he decided to commit violent crimes. Now, Dr. Koyman also said that the rigidity of his thinking due to autism had explained why, when his plan to arrive at the school at about 9 a.m. was prevented, he didn't adapt the plan. So that was something that breached his protocol in his mind, and he didn't know how to manage that. So essentially that's why he flags down the car. Thank goodness, therefore, that he did have autistic spectrum disorder, because that seems to be the reason why he didn't go ahead and kill all of those innocent children. Now, one of the things this psychiatrist said that's very clear for all of us to understand is that he exhibited an extreme lack of empathy. Really? Yeah, that's what I figured out. He's got an extreme lack of empathy. Does anybody even need a report on that? No. You don't need a qualification in anything to know that somebody who goes ahead and does what he's done has a problem with empathy, stroke, doesn't know what it is. Also, when he was questioned about whether he'd ever try to commit another massacre if he got out of prison, he said, well, that's their job to stop me getting the weapons if I get released. So note that he's actually projecting onto the weapons as being the issue as opposed to the person who pulls the triggers. So again, this is a dangerous human being, and he's going to be dangerous till the day he dies, as far as I'm concerned. Now, it was also noted that he was intellectually capable of logically deducing the impact of his actions, so he knew right from wrong, basically. And he said that he'd actually made the choice to commit mass murder and become posthumously famous. And he said, this is just preferable to a menial 9-to-5 job. Said nobody with the shred of compassion, empathy, sensitivity, or any typical experience emotionally in the history of man. Not one human being would ever say that. But let's just go through that. So why did you do it? Well, I was thinking about, life. Yeah, go on. Talk about what you're thinking about. Well, I'm thinking about the fact that, you're expected to get jobs, aren't you? Yes. There are lots of jobs. There are lots of exciting jobs. There are jobs for every interest in the world. Yeah, but I'm not sure the 9 till 5's for me. Well, you could take on shift work. You could work for yourself. Hey, you could become a YouTuber. Go gaming online. You could do all of those things. Yeah. But I'm thinking probably just kill a load of people and then kill myself because that's more interesting. Just gonna back away out of this room whilst questioning some of your fashion choices, Nicholas. Honestly, it really, really speaks of a malevolent nature of the highest level that he can actually balance those factors. Well, I could commit mass murder and I could get a job 9 to 5, but I'm thinking that mass murder is far better than a menial job. Like far better than having purpose, accountability, responsibility. It's bizarre. Now, March 2025, we got to the sentencing. Prosper literally tried to refuse to attend court, but he was ordered to be brought. Anyway, I'm really glad that happened because we are again in the UK are getting to a scenario where lots of people are choosing not to go for their sentencing. Genuinely, and they're getting away with it. Drag them in by the hair if you have to. Drag them in a straitjacket, put them on a lead, I don't care. Victims matter. And when we care about the human rights and decisions of the actual individual responsible for the horror I've been talking about today, and we allow them to make choices that demean and disrespect the court, we have gone a long way past wrong. Now, he was actually sentenced to life in prison, but he was actually given a minimum term of 45 years. Now, bear in mind his age. That means he's got a real strong possibility of being free. Judge Mrs. Justice Chima Grubb, she said in her sentencing remarks, the facts underlying these convictions are chilling. For about a year, after leaving sixth form college in Luton, where you were failing to work towards A-levels, you planned a school shooting on a scale that you hoped would make you globally notorious. You explicitly sought to emulate and outdo Adam Lanza, the 20-year-old American who shot dead 20 children and 6 adults at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Connecticut in 2012. You aimed for 34 deaths, one more than the deadliest school shooting of recent times in the USA, that's at Virginia Tech in 2007. I reject the mildly put submission that disruption to your childhood caused by the separation of your parents when you were young provides mitigation for these offences. I mean, imagine that, guys. Sorry, why have you carried out mass killing? Oh, you wouldn't believe it. At 4, my parents split up. Oh my God. We should definitely understand why those actions occurred. In fact, there seems to be a lot of them because about half of marriages break up, so we can expect a lot of mass killings, can't we? Said no one ever. It makes no sense whatsoever. And again, it really does disrespect the average human being who goes through the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune when parents split up and just manages to navigate it peacefully and compassionately no matter what their age was. The judge went on to say, the evidence is that your father lived nearby and saw you regularly. Most recently, just 2 weeks before the murders, you had a supportive family. Nicholas Prosper, you intended to unleash disaster on the community of Luton. Your plans are intelligent, calculating, and selfish. Your ambition was notoriety. You wanted to be known posthumously as the world's most famous school shooter of the 21st century. The lives of your own mother, your younger brother and sister were to be collateral damage on the way to fulfill your ambition. Your plans failed because your mother woke up and realised that you had a gun and were determined to use it. This led to a horrific triple shotgun murder with each victim dying, knowing you had killed or intended to kill the others. Words such as heartless and brutal are insufficient to describe the horror of those last moments of the people who were closest to you. Kyle Prosper was 16 with his whole future ahead. He fought bravely for his life, but there was no contest with his older armed brother. Giselle was just 13 years old, a smiling girl, no doubt the treasure of her parents and friends. Very compelling and powerful words where that judge is concerned, but still, she's given him a get out of jail free card, hasn't she? Down the line, decades down the line, but he's a young guy. He could live for 20 years freely with that particular sentence. Now, the prosecutor, Timothy Cray, said the evidence suggests that what drove him on most was the desire to be famous or indeed infamous as a mass killer. This was killing for the sake of killing. He wanted to imitate, even surpass other mass killers he had heard of. Now, after the sentencing occurred, Detective Chief Inspector Sam Karner said this: "Our thoughts today are first and foremost with Juliana, Kyle and Giselle, and all who knew and loved them. They should be the names who we remember, their names, who we say rather than the person who carried out these despicable murders and who intended to carry out an unimaginable level of harm to innocent school children. In my entire policing career, which has included many spent investigating murders, I have never encountered anyone capable of such horrific acts while showing no remorse. I have been utterly shocked and appalled by the actions and plans of the offender in this case, and I'm pleased that this truly evil individual will now be serving a significant proportion of his life behind bars." Now, that sentence has upset quite a lot of people. People see it as a lenient sentence. I know it's over 40 years, but people genuinely feel that it's wrong. In fact, Kieran Mullen, the Conservative Shadow Justice Minister, said, "What is the point of making provision for whole life orders if they aren't used in cases like this? What exactly does someone have to do in this country to be sent away for life?" This was the most serious of crimes, including the murder of 2 children. And I do have absolute sympathy with those sentiments, genuinely. Just don't let him out. Don't take a chance. He might change, but you know what? It's not worth having him on the streets in case those beliefs, those feelings, those desires don't leave him. And I appreciate people will say, well, you know what? We see a substantial drop in risk of men over 60 when they come out of prison. They've got bored, they've got sick, they've got tired. I don't care. I'm glad they have. I'm glad that that offending drops. But this man murdered his family and wanted to be notorious for murdering other children. So I don't believe that we can ever really say that he's going to be safe. Now, after the trial, Bedfordshire's Police and Crime Commissioner requested an urgent review of legislation relating to firearms sales and exchange in response to this case. It makes sense. Hazel Simmons, who's the Labour leader of Luton Council, she said, "There are robust systems in place to keep children safe at school at all times, but they have asked schools to review their lockdown procedures and school site security, and have also offered to support any school that feels they'd like to carry out additional site security surveys." Tell you what, I get it. I do get that schools have got these lockdown procedures. I told my kids, and again, you can tell me why I'm wrong in the comments, it's fine, but every parent chooses to parent differently. When my kids were at school, I used to say to them, if ever you hear shooting, if ever you think that a shooter's coming to school, you get to a window and you run. I don't care about lockdown. They ain't staying in that school. They're getting out, because run for your life. You're a sitting duck in these situations unless the doors are so reinforced that those individuals can't get in, and very few schools have that reinforcement, because rightfully so, we shouldn't believe that we're at risk of being murdered whilst at our education centre. So everybody has a different view on it, but lockdown for me is not the way that I would go in this situation. Even if I was a teacher, I'd be literally opening the windows and getting them out, because I just think it's very unusual to have more than 1 or 2 shooters in a school, and they're going to be concentrating in the corridors and getting into classrooms, and I'm going to get my kids out. But everyone is different. Now, as always in a case like this, I think what's really pivotal and paramount for me is, yes, Nicholas Prosper's name is on our lips right now. It's in your ears, it's in your psyche, because I've been talking about it. But let's draw attention away from him. Let's talk about the victims. Let's remember the victims. Kyle Prosper, the young boy who fought for his life. The young boy stabbed over 100 times, surviving each blow until he was shot in the back of the head. Let's remember Kyle Prosper not as the victim, but as a kind and funny young man that everyone loved. He was creative. He was thriving on TikTok. He He was a big talent. He had massive potential. He loved football, he loved boxing. Apparently his friends were literally everything to him. In fact, on a tribute that's been put on a GoFundMe page for the family, it also states Giselle Prosper. So this lovely 13-year-old child, a beautiful soul and caring young girl. She liked to laugh lots. She loved her family, her big brothers. She was so lovable with an infectious smile. Giselle was an exceptional pupil at school and was loved dearly by her friends in year 9. Juliana's friends said that her children were her absolute world. She was described as a strong, loving mother who always put others first. She was a keen athlete. She enjoyed raising money for charity. She was part of the Gamble Girls, which was a volunteer group created in honour of Ed Gamble, a man who had actually died from brain cancer. All 3 of those victims, let's remember them. Juliana, Giselle, Kyle. They have more meaning in their fingertip than Nicholas Prosper has in his entire being and will have in his entire life. This sinister plan that I've talked about by Nicholas Prosper to massacre so many innocent children, it was at least thwarted before he actually got to carry out those plans, to carry out his full intentions. Now, don't get me wrong, as I've just highlighted, that rampage cost 3 amazing lives. His mother, his younger siblings. And for somebody who's been around long enough like me, it just has haunting echoes of the Dunblane massacre in 1996. That's the last school shooting to scar the United Kingdom. But I guess what speaks to me about this case is just the sheer randomness of his capture. It was just this mere stroke of luck that the police officers just happened to drive by him at that precise moment. If they hadn't crossed paths, well, it is breathtakingly harrowing to consider just how many more lives might have been destroyed on that day by this evil individual. This case has left so many lives shattered. So many more could have been shattered. And the truth is, his actions, they didn't occur because he was insane. They didn't occur because of mitigating circumstances. They occurred because he had no regard for human life. All he wanted was reputation. And killing for that reputation made more sense to him than, as he said, getting a mundane 9-to-5 job. It's mind-blowing, guys. I'd love to know your thoughts as ever. Let me know in your comments how you feel about Nicholas Prosper. Should he spend the rest of his natural life in prison and be brought out in a box at the end of those days? Or do you think he deserves a second chance? He didn't give his sister and his brother a second chance, even when Kyle was begging for his life. He just put a bullet to their heads and blew the brains out. I'll see you again next time, guys. Look after yourselves. Be safe.